Welcome to the McNay Art Museum. I'm Rich Asti, and it's always a great privilege to stand before you as the director of this, the first modern art museum in the entire state of Texas. Now, the journey we're going to go on, courtesy of Leslie King Hammond, takes us back a few years. It actually takes us back today before 1973, when the first Motorola prototype of a cell phone was invented. So in order to be appropriate to the history of the past, I ask you to please silence your cell phones so that we can have a historical eye through this presentation. Now, in February, just last month, we blazed a new trail here at the McNay, and with the help of pioneering collectors Harmon and Harriet Kelly, we opened this very season's exhibition with the museum's first major survey ever of African-American modern and contemporary art. Now, thanks to our gifted head of curatorial affairs, Renee Barrio, we inaugurated that season with a groundbreaking exhibition, Something to Say. The McNay presents 100 years of African-American art. And if you haven't seen the show yet, which is on view after this presentation as well, the Kelly collection was and remains at the very heart of that exhibition. Now, the Kelly collection is also at the heart of another exhibition that's on view right now and part of our season of African-American art exhibitions, and that's curator of prints and drawings Lyle Williams' powerful presentation, Haiti's Revolution in Art, Jacob Lawrence's Toussaint Louverture series, and it's on view. You probably walked right by the gallery as you entered this beautiful auditorium. As you exit through the doors behind you, it's just down the hall on the right. Now, with the Kelly's collection here, and when I say the Kelly's collection, it is the country's premier collection of African-American art. We can now tell our visitors a truthful story of American art and American experience. We show through their collection that artists of color have actually helped define the American experience, even when images of that experience were not included in history books or art history books. Even when African-American artworks weren't selected for museum walls or for museum galleries. But the Kellys believed that their children deserved more than that. They believed that their children deserved the truth. And they, through the works of art that they acquired, started creating great sources of pride for who we all are and what we've all accomplished and contributed to together. And that's to a larger American experience. So, for the last 30 years, they began amassing a game-changing collection right here in San Antonio. And tonight, they make their private collection public. And they do so for the benefit of every single one of us in this room. Now, the Kellys are well known to us here at the McNay. Harmon is the vice president of the board of trustees of this great museum, and Harriet is a former and beloved docent. And this season, we very proudly share what we've known here at the McNay for so many years, that art can change lives. Art can also empower lives, and it can even save them. So for all that they've done and continue to do in putting our city, our entire city forward, please join me in thanking our friends Harmon and Harriet Kelly. Well, tonight we blaze yet another trail at the McNay by bringing one of the country's great curators, teachers, artists, and thought leaders to San Antonio. I was going to say for the first time, but at least to the McNay for the very first time, and that's Dr. Leslie King Hammond. As tonight's distinguished lecturer, Dr. Hammond exemplifies the artistic excellence and community consciousness that has come to define the museum's distinguished lecture series, which is made possible thanks to invaluable support from Louis and Frances Wagner. Now, Leslie was born and raised in my former home in New York City, and there she earned her BFA, her Bachelor's of Fine Arts, at Queens College, part of the City University of New York. She then went on to achieve a master's degree and a PhD from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. And somewhere in between, in 1973, she began teaching art history at the Maryland Institute College of Arts. If you don't know that institution, it's one of the oldest art colleges in the country, established in 1826. And when she finally completed her PhD, she was appointed almost immediately Dean of Graduate Studies there, and she maintains teaching appointments at that college in the art history department. She has gone on to serve as vice president of the College Art Association, the CAA, and she served as a trustee, a board of director of the Baltimore School of the Arts, the Baltimore Museum of Art, and the Jacob Lawrence Catalog Raisonné Project. As a gifted curator and author, she's produced projects as varied as Myth and Ritual in African American Art for the Studio Museum in Harlem, Art as a Verb, also for the Studio Museum in Harlem and the Maryland Institute College of Art, Black Printmakers and the WPA, Gumbo Yaya, an anthology of contemporary African American women artists, Over the Line, The Art and Life of Jacob Lawrence, and Huey Lee Smith, as recently as 2010. Leslie's also an artist herself with a focus on installation and fiber art. So she brings just about every possible perspective as an artist, as an author, as a curator, as a thinker, and as a consumer to her work. And she brings that to her presentation here today, the beautifully titled talk, Reverberations, the Challenge of Imaging the African American Experience. So please join me in welcoming to the stage for the first time, but certainly not the last, Dr. Leslie King Hammond.
Thank you so much. Just give me a minute to get my bearings. Okay, water. Very good. Very good. Okay, now, I am extremely excited to be here. And it's been too long since I was in San Antonio last. And my first contact with San Antonio was with a conference for the Arts Councils of the United States. And it was when Cisneros was the mayor. It was when I had my first fajita. Oh my God. Followed by my first margarita. Oh no. And so I shall never forget when I saw the Alamo the first time and I went, oh no, it's so little. So I am back again, thankfully, hoping to return, which I shall, because I was here before this beautiful section of the museum was built. I would like to thank the individuals who reached out to offer me this honorary moment to present a lecture to you, and that's Kate Casey and Renee Balro, and of course my co-conspirator Lowry Sims, who is the author of the wonderful catalog that highlights the Harmon and Harriet Kelly collection. I would like to especially dedicate this lecture to Harmon and Harriet Kelly because they have been so generous in the past to assist me with many other exhibitions that I've done and allowing me to borrow works from their collection for my own exhibitions. And for that, I am totally, totally enamored of their support. Now, when I was asked to do this talk, or I should say directed by Lowry Sims, because Lowry said, I wrote the catalog, I'm not doing another thing. You're going to go talk. And this is not uncommon because Lowry and I have had a very long, long professional and personal and social relationship. Lowry Sims and I were Girl Scouts together, if you can imagine. When you look at my gray hair, you will know I've had that much in my lifetime. And Lowry and I ended up in the same undergraduate school. She was the only major in the art history department. I was the only major in the fine arts department at Queens College. I graduated before her, and then I went on to Johns Hopkins, and they had a few fellowships left. And I said, oh, Lowry, come on down. Lowry came to grad school. So we were there together for a while. Then Lowry decided, no, I have to move on, and she went to CUNY to finish her doctorate. I stayed at Hopkins, finished my doctorate. But then Lowry in the museum world, and me in academia, we began every night to spend hundreds of dollars that we did not have on the phone, complaining about what was not happening in the art world and what needed to be done. She did it from the museum end, I did it from the academic end. In the end, what started to happen is that inadvertently, Lowry and I started to do collaborative projects together, because when she couldn't execute something in the museum world, I'd say, oh, come on down to Maryland. come on down to Micah, we can do something down here. Or I couldn't do something in academia, she would say, wait a minute, I have a space that we can do this. So it has been something what we call, she was my training partner, and I was her training partner. And we learned how to challenge each other and play with ideas and concepts in the field. So I am deeply indebted to her for having worked on this project and given me the opportunity to talk to you. Now, I read all her words clearly. She reads all of my words clearly. And I know that she has made some very important points about the whole business of collecting African American art, which for those collectors who went into this field, especially those of African descent, she calls it a sacred calling. And she is right. It is not something that is taken lightly. And that is because our history has been so fraught with so many challenges and contests. And because our history is so fraught with how we are seen in the world, and nobody ever asked us, how do we feel about being seen in the world? How do we expect to articulate the truth or the reality of who we are? Lowry attributes this practice, this passion, to the specific act of archaeology. And it is true. Because for the earliest collectors of African American art, it was about identifying those works that one spoke to us, either from the area of passion, as Lowry announces in her essay, from the talent or the ambition of the artist, but I also add the opportunity. What were the opportunities for those artists, and what were the opportunities for the collectors? And oftentimes, I don't really feel that there's enough attention paid to the voice of the collector, because there's something very important about what they saw within these works. And when you look at the body of work that they've accrued, of the messages that they're trying to give, each collector has a very, very distinct kind of slant or bias to what they're trying to say or preserve or protect or to lend to the community. Now, granted, there are collectors who collect just because they don't know what else to do or someone else is doing it and becomes a competitive edge, and they're trying to compete with other individuals to get a piece that they feel is desirable. The real fact is that these collectors are doing a great service to our institutions by preserving works that at the time of their execution or even in the historical past missed the opportunity to gain these works. Remember, it has taken American institutions a significant amount of time to play catch up, to realize that these are works that are very much part of the larger story of American history. Now, Lowry, for the purposes of this exhibition, divided it up as it is beautifully installed upstairs into icons, interactions, reflections, vistas, and essentials. And this is so that for the educational programs, for the public, there is a way to look at this very kaleidoscopic constellation of images, ideas, and imagery that has come from such a wide range of artists from the African diaspora. So how do you put it? It's hard to categorize. And one of the things in the mainstream that was a difficulty for critics to deal with is that they couldn't find a niche to place the Black artists. What are they doing? It doesn't look like mainstream art, so what do we do with it? If we don't know what to do with it, we'll just leave it out on the edge, or it's not really that important. Well, in fact, it is important to the very, very core of who we are as a country, as a society, as a culture, and what the legacy of America is all about. And I think we can all agree at this point in history, America is at its greatest point of challenge, given the leadership that we're under right now, quote unquote, and the future of where that is going to take us. So in times of contests like this, of strife, of challenge, the artists find this to be just a rich minefield of imagery to develop. And so this becomes even more important because at the end of the day, the artists will leave us in visual image. They will leave us remnants. They will leave us pieces to help us tell this story. Tazaki Shangaya, the writer for Colored Girls Only Who Have Committed Suicide When the Rainbow Was Not Enough, has made some observations where she says that the African American experience, the African American people are the underclass. They are the blindsided. She says we are the unconscious of the Western world. And yet and still, we need to ask ourselves very clearly, where do we go to find our conscious sense of being? Where do we ever have our dreams? Where is our pain particularly articulated? Where do we heal? These are questions which the larger mainstream has not ever asked. When I was doing this research and what has provoked my own interest in this subject matter, and I have to say that the industry of art history never prepared a place for me or Lowry Sims or any of my other colleagues to come into this field. When we entered the field to study, they did not know what to do with us because we were not, I guess you could say, compliant. We weren't exactly satisfied with the curriculum that they had designed for us to study. And we realized at that juncture in our career, by the time we got to grad school, that a bigger, larger, more important story had to be told. So Lowry and I embarked upon taking advantage in the curriculum of that little line that says, you can do independent study courses. And Lowry and I would go off and find curators in other disciplines in other cities. And we would do independent studies to fortify where our vision needed to come from and to build for ourselves a very strong platform. I became very interested because I spent my career teaching artists. And there is nothing more difficult than learning how to teach artists who are always on the verge of falling asleep in class. Why? Because they're up all night working. So why would they want to come to an art history class, which is dark and warm? Myself, having failed 2 art history classes, I knew well what a boring task that was. So I began to ask myself, as I went through my own career, looking back on how I was moving forward, what was it that was compelling me? Well, and this is going to be the end of my digressions, because then we're going to start looking and start dealing with some issues. As I began my career, which was much to the chagrin of my family, because I can tell you they were not happy about me going into the arts. Neither were they happy about Lowry's family going into the arts, because it was never believed that we could ever become anything important or worthy. My mother thought I would just dry up and be nothing, all right? My father was supportive of me because he just, like petted me like a pure, weird child of his own. And he supported me the best way he could. When Lowry and I met and found out in Girl Scouts when we were like 14 or 15 years old, and we had these interests, we sort of like kept this bond, this friendship, this conversation going. So in my early years, I'm a child of the Civil Rights Movement. I'm a child of the Black Arts Movement. I am a child of the feminist movement. But in my earliest years, I grew up watching the Civil Rights Movement evolve on television. And one day walking to school, I saw this picture on a lamppost going to school, and I was appalled. I couldn't figure out what the picture was. I couldn't have been more than 11 or 12 years old. And I looked at this picture, and I looked at it, and I stood there as I was trying to cross the street, but the picture held me. And then I realized I was looking at, and I will give you the information now, but at the time I didn't know who Emmett Till was. I was looking at the open casket image of Emmett Till's body, who was assassinated in Mississippi for allegedly whistling at a white woman. The Black community, well, Emmett Till's mother had taken the photograph, made a poster, and sent it around, and in the Black community, this poster was posted. I was horrified, but I never said anything to my parents, ever. They never said anything in the home. And I was very curious. I'm 11, 12 years old. I'm going, what is going on? I know what's going on in the South. I know about the bus rides and everything. I'm like, something is really weird going on. So the disillusionment began to set in. As I went on in my education, I then was reading the diary of Anne Frank, another teenage girl. Nazis, hidden, ultimately killed in the concentration camps. And I'm going to myself, I really don't like this world that I've been born into. I'm like pissed off with you humans. There has got to be something else better in this world because I don't like any of this. My parents are not saying anything. I'm seeing all this ugly stuff happening. I'm forced to read this. And I'm not getting the kind of sense of humanity. So I go to the library, and I'm always interested in art. Parents are like trying to make me take piano lessons, and I'm beating the hell out of piano and torturing everybody. So finally they realize that's a waste of time. And they sent me to the Brooklyn Museum Art School for a couple of years, at least my godfather did. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to the library. So I'm going to the library looking for art books that reflect who I am. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So I said, forget it. I'm going to go back to the beginning of history, and I'm going to start with A. So I go and I read all the books on archaeology, everything they have on archaeology. As soon as I finish with that, I go to anthropology. I read everything in the little library on anthropology. Finish with that. By this time, the world is really going downhill rapidly. So I go, okay, this is not working. I'm going to science fiction. Because surely there are some aliens that function better than humans, okay? After I read all of that, I go back and I said, well, let's bring it back to center again. And then I go through all of mythology. So by this time I'm in school and I'm doing all of this work. And so what I am going to do is I'm going to go back to what Lowry's statement says, the kind of specific act of archaeology. And I'm going to start to look at images and share with you some of my thoughts about the Black interior space, the interiority of Blackness, which nobody ever wants to talk about because, first of all, Black is still kind of scary. I mean, the rest of the world is still freaking out because Blackness is now emerging. People are having a mere cardiac arrest that Black Panther is now the largest selling movie. It's like, oh my God, every Black woman's going to turn into a warrior. Some of us were always warriors. You just didn't know it. So now I'm going to start with an image that just came to me a couple of days ago. I thought I had already finished this lecture, and I had thought about it and thought about it. And then all of a sudden I see a blog, and if you all don't read Hyperallergic, you need to sign up and be part of it. What are we looking at? The oldest portrait of African American couple that has ever been discovered, 1841. Neatly tucked underneath the bed of a grandfather who protected this and had remained in this family. The Monitor family from Philadelphia, Hiram and Elizabeth Monitor. Hiram was a bootmaker. He did very well. And from this portrait that we see, done by a gentleman that we know very little about by the name of Street, these are the only known portraits, he looks to be fairly well off. He is in a very palatial environment. He has books to the side, leather-bound books. We don't understand, but leather-bound books are very serious, not just paper-bound or core-bound, but leather-bound. It is a signifier. It is in his time that he notices that he is a man of stature. He's holding in his hand another book, maybe a ledger with all of the documents of his sales. But as a bootmaker, he would have done well. His wife on the other side is extremely well dressed, all right? Probably wearing a satin dress, probably a velvet shawl to go with it. She has lace, she has gold jewelry. This is very uncommon for an African American presence. However, if you did not know that this was African American, you might think that this is a white couple because they are very light skinned. And we cannot discount the tone of their skin color, which plays largely into how African American artists are going to deal with the interiority of the Black space in which they live and have to exist. Too often, African Americans, depending on your color persuasion, It has become an arduous challenge to work within a society that negates you because of the tone of your skin. Certainly you're black, 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 you're middle or mocha, or you're high yellow. I know that in my family, which comes with the heritage of Irish, English, and I just realized Scandinavian, don't know where that came from, but Ancestry.com says, as well as Nigerian. But then my father's side of the family was this tone, and they had blue eyes. And there I was in the family, this tone. And so when I went to high school, graduation of my brother, people were saying, as the family was gathering, "Who's that to my brother?" And they said, "Oh, she's a boarder in the house." Because I was the darker skinned sister, okay? So of course when I got home, you know what happened to him. Because he's the one that came out with the lighter skin, and he had the light blue hazel eyes. These are the things within our spaces of our realities that we have to deal with in our family. And because my brother, the boy, because he was also a boy and he could do anything he wanted to do, I was a girl, the oldest girl of 4 children, you know, I had different standards than him. He could do anything, I could do nothing. So that too pissed me off. But here, we have a couple here who present to us profound information that we now must research, we must get into. This has been on discovery or on display at the Pennsylvania Museum of Art. This is an area of portraiture and imaging that we knew nothing about, and it has literally been within the last week that these images have surfaced. Now let's go to this Charles Alston. And Charles Alston does a portrait, 1934, girl in a red dress. Notice that her skin tone is very chocolate, all right? Now, I'm going to speak more to you from this perspective of the Black experience, all right? I remember doing a lecture once at the Baltimore Museum of Art, and I literally did it in double voice because I did it around the Harlem Renaissance. And it was about how the African American community looked at these works of art as opposed to the white community who looked at these works of art. Well, I can tell you the white people as well as the Black people were equally appalled. How could you talk about these works this way? I said, I'm talking about the time in which they were received. I'm talking about the social circles in which. Charles Alston was a really important artist in his time. Charles Alston, for those of you who don't know who he is, among other things besides being a consummate painter, is also one of the artists responsible for charging and protecting the legacy of a young adolescent, Jacob Lawrence. All right? Charles Alston ran a workshop. Jacob Lawrence was a young man, and he recognized his talent. But Charles Alston was also a man in his time, looking at what was happening around. Now, Charles Alston was living in Harlem. We know that between 1925 to 1945, between World War I and World War II, the Great Migration, that is African Americans who decided to move from the southern regions of the United States to the more urban centers of the United States, looking for opportunities and jobs, looking for education, trying to get away from the violence. Certainly they were moving into more segregated arenas, and not really being welcome in these new urban centers, but yet and still populating their urban centers at the urging of the Black press. Meaning there's industry, there's urbanization, there could be more opportunity for you. Artists immediately heard this. They flocked. They began to center themselves in New York City, where Charles Alston was. Charles Alston had a studio up in Harlem called the 406. Artists would go to his studio and they would work, they would talk. They would share information and train each other. But at the same time, they were starting to do portraits of each other. Why? What was the impetus? The godfather of the period, of what we call the New Negro Movement, or more commonly known as the Harlem Renaissance. But it was the New Negro Movement because there was a new awakening. There was a new sensibility. Alain Locke was a philosopher, preeminent philosopher at Howard University, first one to graduate from Harvard. He began to write in a book called The New Negro and talk about African American artists, the creative community, looking to Africa as their ancestral source. Not Europe, but Africa. And so portraits like this become part of that early quest to investigate images of individuals who would not ordinarily have been used as subject matter because lighter-skinned black women would have been preferred. Elizabeth Catlett. Elizabeth Catlett was a young artist, and these are not necessarily in chronological order because working in the chronological order sometimes limits how artists are thinking and feeling about work. This is a singing head. This is an onyx bust. By this time, Elizabeth Catlett, one of the earliest sculptors, females, to move into this genre, begins to look at the female image. So she was a feminist long before feminism was born in the 70s with Betty Friedan and the women's movement. Elizabeth Catlett always talked about the strength of women, and her works were always gorgeous, just beautiful renderings. But the thing is that, and I did a show in the early 90s called 3 Generations of African American Women Sculptors, a study in paradox. In the aftermath of slavery, more of the men who were gaining access to education went on to become painters. Henry Tanner, Edward Bannister, Edward Scott, all these people went to become easel painters. The women, Elizabeth Catlett, even before her, Meta Warwick Fuller, Nancy Elizabeth Prophet, these women went on to become sculptors. And this was really a phenomenology that had not been looked at and still is not dealt with. Contemporaneously, we have images of portraits of blacks that harken back to the past. Whitfield Lovell, this is a piece called Cakewalk in the exhibition, which looks at his images, which are usually done on a piece of reclaimed wood, drawn, beautiful, always in a kind of sepia tone, playing off of the texture and the tone of the wood. But here he adds an installation component, the cakewalk, which we know is a dance, but also he is making a statement about when we get older, sometimes elderly people need a little assistance, and they look like they're doing the cakewalk as they're using their canes or staffs to support them. So that there are several ways to look at this movement. But Whitfield is known to do these eloquent studies that draw the past and the present and the contemporaneous role of how African Americans within their life cycles, because nobody wants to talk about what it's like to get old, to be black, and to have been ignored your whole life. So Whitfield brings us back to those moments. Then we have a contemporaneous moment, okay? This is, I love this, see? Harriet and Harmon are grinning because this is their niece, okay? And this is my baby because I taught her. She was at the Maryland Institute College of Art. She is now at the Studio Museum in Harlem, working in the education department, doing amazing things. This is called picking, all right? And at the time, afros, which were the rage still, and so she decides to extend it. I remember Lauren in class, she wore the bejesus out of me. That girl just would not shut up, okay? She had a question every class, okay? Every other day. But those are the students I loved because she was challenging what was being executed at the time in terms of the historical surveys that I was given, because I taught regular surveys of Western art history, as well as African American art from the beginning of the period of the 18th century all the way up to present time. Lauren was never satisfied. So when she did this and I saw this in the collection, I was just elated, because you never know when you're teaching If anything you say will be heard, much less absorbed, much less acted upon, so that you will see it in your lifetime revealed. Lauren saved my day. Then we have the work of an Ebony Patterson, okay? Looking at how we look at ourselves. And trust me, these artists are not making work for, quote unquote, an audience or a community. They are literally, seriously doing the business of what is the psychic state? Where is my emotional state? Where is my physical sense of being in the midst of a society that is forcing me to live under so many absurd restrictions? In this one, this is part of her kind of disciple series. It's untitled. But as you can see from the halo and the ornamentation around her head, she also, I tend to liken Ebony Patterson's work with the Afrofuturist movement, of which we have very little conversation about either, all right? But growing up, as I did in Queens, where I lived, the jazz movement was in full force. So I grew up hearing Pharoah Sanders. I came up hearing John Coltrane. I came up hearing, Sun Ra and Archie Shepp. And I mean, they were around the corner in the bars and the local places in Queens. MJQ lived in the next neighborhood over. Count Basie also, and he had a big house. And even James Brown lived in Queens for a while and had a house with an awning and a moat around it. Don't let me go there, okay? I don't know what that was about, but we knew that these individuals were at another kind of intellectual, psychic, spiritual stratosphere, and their movements and their music reflected that. So I'm being, inundated with this stuff. This is like the archaeology of my currency and my engagement of where I am. I'm trying to figure out what the hell is going on. I got this mainstream madness going on, and then at the same time, there is this incredible creativity that is going on, and it is not a uniform, synchronized, one perspective point of view. I'm like, they're all over the place. Everybody has their own vision. Benny Andrews, on faculty at Queens College, where I'm at school. Benny spent a lot of years teaching within the prison programs that were administered by Queens College. This is a piece that he did called Cop. And when Benny started to do this is a piece that was oil on canvas, but also Benny would take pieces of fabric and he would saturate them with pigment. And then he would physically manipulate them on the canvas so that they were raised up. These were, we call it mixed media. No, Benny took it to another level. He actually shaped. And what happened is that we got these visceral responses. Now, this is a piece from the 1960s, 1968. This is kind of like the period of assassination of Martin Luther King. The pigs, okay? This is called Cop, but this is when this is when there was a rampant kind of attack by the federal government, the FBI, on the Black Panthers, all right? The cops were literally wandering rampant. Not too different than from today, I might add. But Benny Andrews gives us that image. So I decided to pair it with this piece done by Glenn Ligon with Malcolm X, all right? Who, at the same time, was a paramount figure. But Glenn Ligon did something else, okay? And he paints red lipstick and kind of like 2 dots, like a Cupid doll, all right, on Malcolm X. And this is like begging the question, the political, intellectual question about, if we had thought that Malcolm X could have been compromised, even sexually, would his ideologies been any different? No, I think not. But the artists, looking at each of the characters and the energies that go into them, begin to play, dream, imagine, provoke, and expect you to come up with your own responses to this. So you can't look up in a book and find the easy answer to this. It doesn't exist because the artist does this deliberately. William Pope L. Oh God, I just told Renee, please bring him to here for a talk. He is absolutely fascinating. He is a performance artist. William Pope L. physically goes into those spaces, all right? If you've ever seen him, he is absolutely amazing. We brought him to Micah one time, and he began to talk, and the grad students had no idea what he was talking about. He says, I'm going to act out for you. I'm going to physically get on the floor. Thank you for putting that video, that flat screen on the floor so that your kids can get on the floor as you watch him pull his body through. That Superman image is just fabulous, okay? The struggle that he physically, aesthetically tries to create for you. It is fascinating to watch the kids watch this video. They get it like this. We adults, we got to do a little deconstruction. We have to talk a little bit about it. Why does he have a skateboard on his back? Why is he wearing a Superman thing? Because he is trying to say, and this piece is about asphyxiation, I cannot breathe. Intellectually, spiritually, as a human being, I can't breathe under the pressure that I am forced to deal with. So William Pope L. is one of those individuals who is fabulous. At one point in his lecture, the students are in such a state of shock. He goes, wait a minute. He said, can somebody give me a hug? And the students were like, and I went, oh, this is pure genius, okay? And one student jumps up in the audience, runs down, and she says, I'll give you a hug. You never guess who it was. Amy Sherald, the artist who has become the talk of the century now. She says, I'll give you a hug, and I'll give you a kiss. All right? Because what he was trying to do was humanize what he was doing and to tell you that these things are not alien, but this is how people feel. Think of all the incarcerated black males, incarcerated for the most ridiculous. Think of all the brown incarcerated males. Think of all the Indian incarcerated males. What do they feel like, okay? That they're in a paper bag and they're trying to, find me a full, clean breath. All right, let's go back. Let's look at, again, Palmer Hayden, okay? And I love this. Thank you for the McNay for making this an interactive in the gallery. I couldn't believe when I walked in and there was this empty chair with this table and this teacup. And then I looked at it, and the next thing you know, there are 3 little girls there taking turns. And I took pictures, I documented, of them sitting in the chair, posing. I said, what a fabulous way to make a connection. These kids were loving it. Then all the other images around, the portraits of women. Why were these images done? African Americans who had migrated north, not just from the South, but my family came from the Caribbean. My family came from Barbados and Guyana, all right? There were also Africans who came from the western sectors of Africa looking for greater opportunity, because at that time of history, Caribbean and Africa were under colonialized situations. So they too could not breathe. Sometimes they just couldn't eat. There was no food. For my family, they had sort of like the islands just don't provide those kinds of resources. So they moved, and they moved into these areas. In New York, where I'm very familiar because that's where my family settled, they settled in the Bronx, they settled in Brooklyn, and they settled in Harlem. And this is a woman who was probably in Harlem, all right? This is Palmer Hayden, lived in Harlem, and he's looking at this dame from Harlem, all right? Here she is black with a string of pearls. There is nothing more elegant. She is probably wearing a satin dress, all right? She is sitting in her house in probably a velvet upholstered chair. Next to her, she has tea. She is civilized. She is brown skinned. She has a large nose. This is not your typical kind of mulatto with those features that are very refined. She is very African. Her hair is an afro in 1930, my God. This was not an image that was welcomed at its time because images were expected to be beautiful, pretty, appealing. But to Palmer Hayden, she was beautiful. Now I'm going to ask you a question. What's strange about this portrait? Look at her face. Look at her hands. What's up with her legs? Okay? What happened with those legs? These images tell the story of rigid segregation. She's dressed. She has on silk stockings. What's the problem with those silk stockings? They didn't make them for us. That's right. They're white. All right? And he made them white to make a statement that she couldn't get stockings in her own color. Now, I remember when I was growing up, I was really excited to become a young woman. And at school, they were going to have a fashion show one day. And the teacher said, well, you have to wear stockings. I was so excited. I was probably 12 years old. Ran home and told my mother, Mommy, I'm going to be in a fashion show, and I have to wear stockings. My mother went, oh, my God. Because there were no stockings my color, and I thought that I could have stockings my color. So what happened? My grandmother taught me how to tint the stockings with tea bags and coffee, all right? And I learned at a young age, okay? And they're laughing because you know it's true, all right? Harriet and Norman are laughing because they know this is what happened. And so I learned how to tint, and I got real good, okay? I would learn different coffees and mix them with the teas, and because I was into my art making thing, and I was like, oh, this works for me. However, it's things like these that are very telling about the time. And it's also telling because silk stockings were expensive. This is 1930, 1 year after the Great Depression. Nobody had any money. There was no excess dollars. People were having rent parties in order to pull their pennies together to pay. So what were you doing, lady, that you had silk stockings in a time of such financial duress? Okay? What was, and the other thing is she has a dog, little white fluffy dog, all right? There are flowers in the back. Where did those flowers come from? I dare say he saw a Van Gogh, all right? And so he's signifying a little bit, you're gonna hear about that, because this is what African Americans did within the realm of creativity. We would see things that white painters would do, and we would just like throw that into the composition, like, oh, I just came up with a still life. No, you didn't. You know what you was doing. Okay? It was like, if I throw this in here, you might pay attention to me. All right? So, and then we go into the real issue about the black body, because we know that historically, African people were brought here as property. You did not have rights. You couldn't own anything. Your body was not your own. So here we have a Mickalene Thomas, which is in the show upstairs. I love it. And if you haven't seen it, go up there because it sparkles too. Mickalene sort of tintillates you with some glitter in it, And the piece is like called Whatever You Want, okay? Now, this is a little subtext in that too. Be careful what you ask for. Are you sure you can afford this? Okay? In the aftermath of the history that we have been through, where my body has been completely defiled. Because, until the Emancipation Proclamation, women's bodies, or I should say, black women's bodies, if you had been assaulted or raped, they wouldn't try it because you were property and you can't be charged for something like that. So as we evolved, and Mickalene Thomas, being at the high end of the feminist movement, is now taking her own body. Do you understand? And she does a lot of work with the female body in reclining news and odalisque, in positions where are suggestive, which taunt and tantillate the fantasies of the outer world, but also, girlfriend is her own sexual being. You are my lover, or you want to be my lover? What do you want? Are we going to negotiate this? She asks those questions. Now, on the other side, I paired it with a male nude. Barclay Hendricks from 1975. Mickalene is 2005, all right? But again, within that time period, you see that we are still dealing with the gravity of how the black male body is dealt with. Now, in the time that Barclay Hendricks did this was not a small portrait. This was like 6 foot. And when these came out, these are pre-Kehinde Wiley, all right? Kehinde doubled up on the scale. By the time we get to Kehinde, he's boom, boom, all right? But they were all clothed, all right? Barclay figures 6, 7, 8 feet. I'm gonna make the statement. These were shocking, shocking to see the black male body so idealized, so beautifully rendered. But at the same time, this brother is cocky, okay? He's like, I'm handling, like what you see? No different from Michelino saying, whatever you want, all right? So you have these kind of dichotomies going on as these artists are beginning to interrogate the sexuality and the issues of sexualizing their bodies within the mainstream, and then also how they are dealt with within the constitution of the African American experience, which has a whole different set of criteria that they're dealing with. This is called Fat Eddie, jive nigga, all right? We then come to Xavier Simmons, 2007, color photograph. And here it is not, African-American artists are no longer shy about taking off their clothes and presenting themselves in terms of the mirror that they have in evaluating who and what they are and where their issues are. This is called One Day and Back Then. So, I'm wondering, is that one day and that's back then? Or is that back then and that's one day? This is the beauty of these things. These are also images where she is dealing with the grotesque imagery that has been put upon. And I remember seeing images of Michelle Obama that were done from European artists who were mocking her tonality and her intellectualism by denigrating her image and putting her with this masking red and these big afros and trying to make her look like the ugly, horrible, grotesque woman, not realizing this is a woman, probably the most educated woman ever to be in the White House as the First Lady, and to be a woman commanding in her own right. Xavier Simmons takes herself and puts her out in a field. What are these fields? What is this space? These are the spaces in which black people had to figure out how to survive. I was working on the Rice Project in, Charleston, South Carolina. And we went to some of the rice plantations, and we took a boat going through some of the channels and the waterways, because the low country of South Carolina was very conducive to growing rice. That's why Africans were brought in, because they knew how to grow rice. But as they were talking about the lecture, they were talking about what the Africans had to do to prepare the land, this land that you see here, Xavier has recreated, to grow it. And they had to level the land. They had to pull all of the growth out, all of the trees, all of the animals. But what was in these waterways that they had to constantly be aware of? Snakes, alligators, all kinds of insects that would attack them. And we wonder, what was their life like above and beyond just being horrific? The black male body again. And of course, the swagger. The swagger. And the swagger was always there, even before we knew it was a swagger. To dress, even back in the day, you go back to the portrait of the Monitor, Hiram Monitor, in 1841, and you see him properly dressed. So as it comes up in contemporaneous time, this was a way for African Americans to establish their sense of being, their sense of priority, their sense of maleness. This one here is called Yellow is Mellow, and this is Jeff Sunhouse. Now this is a curious painting. I love this one because it poses many problems. It poses problems for those light-skinned males. all right, who are beautiful. And in order for some of them, for you to actually engage their African sense or their descendancy, they do wear afros or dreads, or they wear their hair out in braids. He is dressed, purple suit, wonderful. He is showing his identity, all right? He has a melanin profile belt on him. But the other thing is that he could also be albino. He could also be an albino, which is a very troubling factor within especially African communities and African descended communities, because we don't understand the genetic anomaly that this represents, this lack of pigmentation. And people of this color have horrible, difficult lives. In Africa, they are literally thought to be possessed by devils or demons. And in some communities and cultures within Africa, they are hunted down and literally assassinated. In our culture, they are literally sometimes isolated into other communities. On the other side, we have another Barclay Hendricks, love it, 1971. This is 2001. This is called Noir. This is a dressed individual, male, conveying his kind of sense of identity and importance. And he's in a pinstripe suit. I don't know if you can see it very well, but if you see it in an exhibition, it's pinstripe suit. In Philadelphia, where Barclay Hendricks grew up, and that's the culture he came out of, the men who wore these wore what we call vines. These were vines. These suits were called vines, all right? And then when he went to Paris, he would see all of the African males who had just come in from the motherland into Africa and being very much affected by the fashion and the haute couture and the casual kind of elegance, chicness, would wear these suits. And so these became very, very important. Notice that among Barclay Hendricks, now the afro is a little bit more refined and tightly coiffed, while in the Sun House picture, the man is wearing dreads. Huey Lee Smith, again, takes the black figure into another whole realm. I can tell you, each and every artist moves in a different direction. Each and every artist has a different view because of their own worldview, because of their experience. Here, you see the figure standing on a dock, water, and balloons. What the hell are balloons doing in a portrait like this? What is that about? Okay. This is some of the coding or the codification that comes with the individual experience of each artist. When Huey Lee Smith was growing up, I wrote a book on him. When he was growing up, he would see the carnival come to town. And he would ask his family, his mother, his grandmother, I want to go to the carnival. She said, no, you can't go there. I don't want you contaminated. No, 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 no. And so this would become a longing for what he would want to do if he were older and had free license to experience. So this is an early painting. Fortunately, the Kellys were very smart to get this painting. Okay, this is one of the better ones in this series that talks about this kind of longing for the freedom. She looks directly at the viewer. In his later works, the subjects do not look at the viewer. In the later works, the skylines become more important with the clouds to talk about the tone and the temper of the time, the volatility. And all of his works were talking about that in-between space, the space where you work alone in order to define and figure out where you're going, what you're about, what are your pains, what are your dreams, what are your imaginations. And Huey Lee Smith was the master of that. Somebody asked me today, Kara, where are you? My favorite. I will admit, these are some of my favorite. What the hell are these portraits? Okay, what is this about? All right? This is Nick Cave. Nick Cave created, these are called sound suits. Sound suits. Nick Cave, in his life, was a dancer. Not uncommon for many artists to have other skills, other disciplines that they work through. Nick Cave started to make these sound suits after he finished grad school. And what he would do is make these suits, of which there are dozens of them. And he would put the suit on himself, and then he would invite people of any persuasion, any color, to put on the suits. Then he would put music on, and he would ask them to create movement in conjunction with the sounds they heard. Many of the suits, some of them, not this furry one, but this one with all the flowers, and there were a few others that are on display, actually make noise as you move. And so what he's doing is breaking down the barriers between people through having them move in these sound suits. And it is a beautiful, incredible performance experience. Yes, they're very sculptural like this, but there is nothing better, and perhaps at some point the museum can get one of the videotapes from his gallery that talks about the movement of these. If you made little mini sound suits for children, they would absolutely relish this, okay? This would be a fantastic experience, because now artists are trying to figure out, how do I get beyond this race thing? Because after a while, you know, it gets really annoying. It gets boring. It gets limiting. I remember going to Australia once and meeting some Aboriginal artists, and they were standing outside of a museum where I went up and I saw their whole history done, and I came out and I was talking to them again, and I said, wow, your history is no better than ours. You were colonized by the English. How do you deal with it? The guy's smoking, he says, it's really annoying. Charles White, masterful figurative artist. Charles White, everyone in every collection feels they have to have a Charles White, and they're absolutely correct. 1942, this sort of goes, hear this, two gentlemen having a conversation. Or are they singing? Or are they just emoting about something? William Henry Johnson, I wrote my dissertation on him. My dissertation supervisor, every time he came to this section, all he kept saying is, more jitterbugs, all right? But again, William Henry Johnson was way ahead of his time, because when he started doing these, the black artists as well as the white artists said, what the freaking hell is he doing? What is this about? These are images from the WPA era, silk screens from 1941 to 1942. But he's listening, you know, like if this were too slow-Lautrec, you wouldn't ask this question. But he was in the nightclubs. He was in the Savoy Ballroom watching people dance, all right? But the other thing that people miss is that he is also signifying on the emergence of abstraction that was coming in from Europe, vis-a-vis Picasso, Cubism. Also, look at her legs. See something reflected there? All right? Again, recording these images, but these, he has the music, the drums, the sound, all right? These are so, and now when I did my dissertation, nobody wanted to even look at this. Now at the Smithsonian, all of his works in this period are all in the curator's office, and they fight over them unless they're not out on loan, because now people get it. Interesting thing, as I'm working on this, I'm working with two of my assistants at MICA, where I don't work anymore, but I'm still there every other day. And I put this image up and I said, I don't know what I should put after this. How about this? And one of the assistants says, I see the movement. This is Chakaya Booker, okay? And Chakaya Booker, this is called position preferred, all right? But Chakaya Booker works only with rejected, recycled tires, trucks, cars. She strips them down. She makes all of these shapes, and then she puts it together in sometimes in these beautiful, now this is a small one, but it is nothing for her to take a wall like this, okay? So who's she looking at? Oh, Louise Nevelson did it with wood. She's doing it with tires. Where do artists go when they don't have money for materials? They become inventive. Everybody's throwing away a tire. Think about all the tires you all threw away, okay? This is what she's using. Only she is recycling it within a realm that makes a new kind of aesthetic sense. She's also looking at those spaces where homeless people live, and they take those tires when they can to build units and spaces for them to live in. So preferred position, or position preferred, talks about how you can create design, form, structure. And again, this is wonderful stuff to give to children to play with, because they would identify immediately with this, giving them that sense of freedom to move in that direction. Shanique Smith, another one of my students. Jesus, I'm so old. I have so many students, but I'm happy that a lot of them are doing well. Shanique Smith in this show has a piece of found objects. This one, which is not in the show, talks about and this is like what she calls a crone huntress, or a warrior, a woman warrior. And Shanique takes old garments, old items discarded, reconfigures them, because these old items have past lives imbued within them. They have the energies of former histories. She puts them all together, places them into these totemic kinds of structures. Rose Piper. This is a piece that deals with the spirituality and the belief systems, some of them having come from Africa. This is called conjure, all right? And there are systems within this country which still honor this fact. Well, given the darkness of the subjects, given the figure which pins are being put in, we would suggest that this would be a negative action, which would produce an even more malevolent end or demise to the individual. Again, Rose Piper, aunt of Adrian Piper, those of you who know conceptual artists, was probably a great inspiration to Adrian, who became a very powerful conceptual artist. In this piece, again by Charles Alston, and I thank Harriet and Harmon Kelly for loaning it to me when I did an exhibition called Ashe to Amen, African Americans and Biblical Imagery, where I examined the role the Bible played within the African American experience. We see here the cycle of a family mourning the transition, the passing, the death of a loved one. We see them looking up so that as the spirit lifts, they are rising with it. As the hands are going up to consecrate, to connect, it's almost like invisible rays of energy from the fingertips going to the top. These are subjects that are very rare to be seen. They are very difficult to record, but very central to the experience and the life cycles of the people. This is particularly a Southern experience. And then we have a more current experience as recorded by Hank Willis Thomas, and this is called Priceless. And it is picking the perfect casket for your son. It is a hard image. It's an image today which we give a half of a moment or two to the passing of Stephon Clark, the most recent victim in the Sacramento shootings. And we ask ourselves, or Hank Willis Thomas asks ourselves, when does it stop? This is personal now. This is very personal, because Hank Willis Thomas suffered the loss of a cousin who was shot and killed in a drive-by, a robbery. And so these issues are real in a sense that are so palpable that the artists are very, very, I would say, pained in a way, because no one is getting it. No one is stopping this vicious cycle. No one is seeing it worthy. Not even with the shootings in Florida, where all of these white students on the campuses, are we seeing any return or revisitation of this critical problem, which assaults all of humanity. Norman Lewis, jazz musicians. Abstraction was a very difficult subject, theme, style for artists of color to have accepted within mainstream canons. But at the same time, These are the artists sitting in the clubs, listening to the musician, creating their own imagery, creating their own response. And so we look to Norman Lewis because he was so very important in beginning the vocabulary, the visual language that is necessary to approach this. These are all topics which have yet to be thoroughly researched and put into context within the mainstream of American art. Gary Simmons, Duck, Duck, Noose. Here he talks about the role of the Ku Klux Klan, which is desperately trying to rise again. After the Charlottesville incident, where the woman was killed on the college campus of the University of Charlottesville in Virginia, this has become a difficult question because these issues keep resurging. So artists are bringing them back in different formats so that we can address them. These are placed on stools that are usually found in schools. So he's asking us, he's asking the question of the larger audience, are we teaching things in our school? Are things happening in our society which are reinforcing these beliefs? Michel Basquiat, master of graffiti, the godfather, on the written wall, okay? This is called 10 million yen. And in this 10 million yen, we marvel because here he has little signifiers about the cost of things. But then of late, did we realize that $210 million was paid for Basquiat, a piece called Skull, by a Japanese collector? How come the Japanese get it? What's up? What is up and happening in America? This is our artists. This is our legacy. This is our terrain. And now as I close out this lecture, you know I can't leave this alone. Love the Kehinde Wiley that you have on the wall. Beautiful. But this one is a slam dunk. Why? Because Kehinde Wiley, and I watched him talk about it because I was there at the unveiling, I watched him talk about why and how he did this. And I listened to Barack Obama, first time I ever saw him live in living color. Oh my God. He talked about this, and he asked Kehinde, he said, please, you know, as they were going through the process of preparing for the portrait, he said, please don't, you know, my gray hair, just, you know, try to make it a little bit darker. He said, and you know, my ears, he said, try to stay away from my big ears. And as Barack says, he did not listen to me at all. But what Kehinde did was place Barack Obama in an honorific royal position. Because if you look globally through Western and Asian art and through African scenarios, you will find that great leaders are seated on a chair in a sacred garden, a sacred space. You see the flowers that are there. And I read all of the reviews, I read all of the pundits. The flowers were the flowers of Hawaii, where he was born, and the flowers of Chicago, where he lives and works. And so he is properly placed, regardless of what we think, within the environment and the situation of his time, so that we begin to understand that Barack has many, many personas which we have yet to fully fathom and understand. But this is the one that's rocking everybody. Michelle Obama. People looked at this and just, oh my God. I had special privy, but when I saw the dress, and then I saw in the collection that you had this wonderful, magnificent quilt from Gee's Bend, Mary Lee Bentloff. It's just exquisite. Amy Sherald is an artist who has a studio and a project that I manage. I was blessed to be there to watch her finish this portrait. Amazing. It was a historic moment. I'm still trying to get over it, okay? Probably never will. But this is one of the inspirations that she used to tell this story of who she was, of who Michelle is, of what Amy Sherrill is trying to say. Amy has gotten a lot of attack for graying out the subject. She is really throwing back to Whitfield Lovell's approach of reclaiming old ancestral photographs. She looks a lot at 19th century photography to try to find that in-between space. She talks a lot about how, Amy Sherrill talks about a lot about her relationship in dealing with Michelle Obama in the making of this. After she shot photographs of Michelle in a garden, all right, which she deleted from the final work, unlike Barack Obama, who was in the garden, she places her in this blue ground. I call it like a pale Yoruba blue. And the blue is the calm. It is the confident. It is the controlling. It is the focused. And then she takes the dress, Millie, one of her favorite designers, and she really plays on it like the quilts that are done in Gee's Benz, which are made out of, and this quilt is called Put Together. I just put this quilt together. Well, damn, if I had a brain like that, I wish I could put stuff together. These women from Gee's Benz make quilts out of literally scraps, old cloth, whatever they can find. They are probably the poorest of poor women in this cul-de-sac in Alabama. Amy Sherrill has been doing her art history. I'm so proud of her. She remembers her lessons. But she understands the legacy of where people come who theoretically have nothing and don't realize the genius of what they've done with the minimal materials. As this portrait came out, 2 days later, Amy and I are talking, and she says, "Oh, I'm so upset." I said, "Why?" She says, "I'm getting such negative reviews on the portrait." I said, "I don't know why you are paying attention in this age of technology." I said, "There's a little button on your computer that says delete." I said, "Please remember that your patron, Michelle Obama, chose you." And she was absolutely thrilled with the outcome. She never saw the portrait before it was unveiled. So the first time Michelle Obama saw it was when on the stage at the National Portrait Gallery. But it was when this happened. Come on. This picture on the left. I don't know how many of you saw this. It was when this little picture of a little girl by the name of Parker Curry, 3 years old, stood in front of the portrait. Her mother took her and her other little baby sister, who was even younger, to see the portrait at the National Portrait Gallery. She said Parker walked up to it, and if you will see Parker's face, her mouth is open. She is totally struck. Now, if you want to know what the black interior space is, there it is, all right? She immediately looked at Michelle Obama. The mother called her name over and over, because you know mothers. She wanted her to turn around so she could get a picture of Parker and Michelle. You know, Parker was like, "I'm here. Don't bother me, I'm here." And it was a person online standing behind them that witnessed this. The whole line stopped because Parker was just awed. A few weeks later, and I'm so sorry that's pixelated on the left, I don't know what happened, Amy Sherrill went to see Parker. And they were sitting on the floor in front of the portrait. And I said, "Amy," you know, I'm texting Amy, "Amy, what are you and Parker doing?" She said, "Parker and I were looking at the colors in her dress and comparing the colors in Michelle's dress." My point is this is where we need to go. This is what our future is about. If we are not preparing these children to begin to engage this kind of connection with art, all kinds of art, where are the new patrons going to come from? Where are the new Harriet and Harmon Kellys going to come from? Where are the new artists, the Kende Wileys, to Barclay Hendricks, to Charles Alston, you know, the Elizabeth Catletts? Where are they going to come from if we don't make the best of this? So as I am finishing off this study, one of my assistants says, "Oh, you want to see something? Parker is 3." I took my 16-year-old son to the Baltimore Museum of Art because I'm trying to imbue him with culture beyond video games, beyond his cell phone, beyond eating pizza, as a hormonal teenager would do. I'm trying to get him to move on. He can't move on. He is completely absorbed in this painting. She said, so I took a picture. I said, oh, perfect. This is, Crosby is her last name, Ndike Akuliuli. And she does interiors. So when I look at the portrait, I know that this artist deals with interiors. And interiors that are often described in the work of Zora Neale Hurston, in her work called the expressions of Negro expressionisms. And in this essay, she talks about how interiors of Black homes and spaces are decorated. And when in doubt, you can decorate the decoration because there is no such thing as too much beauty. So what is he looking at? I looked at the mother and I looked at the picture and I said, come here, look what he's looking at. He's looking at the picture on the wall with the guy with the hair, just like him. She went, oh my God, I did not see that. To end this lecture, I say that we have to reach out to the next generation. This is a teacher in Baltimore who saw the same week the Obama portrait, said to her students in the art class, let's do some portraits. She said the students produced the most fabulous portraits she had ever seen them create. They were never more so engaged. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much. There is so much more to be said, but maybe I'll come back. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. I think it's kind of funny that Leslie, as she began her lecture tonight, self-proclaimed herself as a warrior. But I think a few minutes into the lecture, she morphed into a very gentle guide. And you were a wonderful guide. You took us back 170 years to that first African-American double portrait just unveiled last week. And you took us all the way to the present, Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherald. And I, for one, hope you never get over the experience of watching Amy Sherald complete that portrait of Michelle Obama. Okay. So we have a treat for you tonight. For the next hour, the museum remains open, and if you want to take all of the wonderful words that Leslie shared with you tonight, all the decoding of the American experience, she reminded us how complicated it is to define the American experience, to see what it is to be American, but you did a beautiful job of making it relevant to the 21st century, so thank you for that. Please enjoy all the galleries upstairs, including the 4 African-American art shows that are up for another 2 months, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next lecture. Thank you. Have a good evening.